Anyway, so I'm grateful for that opportunity. This is dealing with chapter 25 and just the very first two verses of 26 of Leviticus is what this Torah portion was about. And I'll be honest, I don't keep up with Torah portions. I have my own life. I'm trying to get through the Bible, and I'm trying to take my time, and I'm trying to digest it, so I haven't done it yet. It's been years. And I'm almost back to the New Testament now. It's been a long, long journey. When Amy reminded me that I had a Torah portion on Monday this week, it had been 5 months since I'd registered, so I'd totally forgotten. So I was like, woohoo, all right. And so my wife and my family who's staying with us over here, say hi to them before they leave, please, have helped me to watch our children so that I have a little time to work on this and you guys benefit somewhat. And me too. I've learned a lot through this. So it talks about, and this is again chapter 25, 26 Leviticus, the very first two verses of 26, talks about the Sabbath for the land and a couple other things. But in the Sabbath for the land, it talks about where once the people came into the land, they could cultivate and reap its harvest for 6 years. On the seventh year, it was forbidden to sow seed, prune vineyards, harvest, or gather what grew without, the maintenance of tending cultivated crops or fruit or vineyards and stuff. So I myself feel some small anxiety when reading this. You can't, what are you going to eat? It's not like a supermarket where, it's okay, we're not, going to garden this year. We'll just go to the supermarket. That was their food source. So how, I felt a little anxiety when I read this, knowing the context. But Yahweh provides for our concerns when he promises in later down in the chapter, verse 20 through 22, now if you ask, what are we to eat during the seventh year? We are not to sow nor gather in our increase. Now I command my blessing to you in the sixth year so that it will yield a harvest sufficient for 1? No. 2? Okay, that's just enough. For 3 years. That's what he said. He promised that. When you sow during the 8th year, that's the year after the Sabbath year, you will still be eating the old stored harvest from the 6th year, until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. Wow. That's a lot of food, especially for you guys who have a lot of kids. How much food is that? That's a lot of food. $10,000 worth of food, right? Something like that, maybe? I don't know. I only have 2 children right now, and one of them just drinks milk, so I have no idea what that would be. But in the following chapter, we have many of the blessings of obedience and curses of disobedience. Here's one of the curses. Okay, so buckle up. We know a lot of us know that the curses can be kind of intense. But then the blessings are very intense too. And this is 26, 33, 35. Forgive me the next Torah portion person, but this was in the context of it. I will scatter you among the nations, and this is, of course, if this is not, in the following chapter we have many of the blessings of obedience. This is in the context of if they depart from obedience, and they choose to walk according to their own lusts, and, betray God in his covenant with them. I will scatter you among the nations, and I will draw out the sword after you, so your land will become a desolation, and your cities will become a waste. Then the land will enjoy its Shabbatot all the days of its desolation, while you are in the land of your enemies. Then the land will rest and enjoy. The land will enjoy its Shabbatot. As long as it lies desolate, it will have rest. That rest which it did not have from your Shabbatot when you lived in it, or lived on it. The curse assumes that among the lawless behavior of God's people is the failure to have faith that keeps his promises and to provide 3 times the usual harvest in the 6th year. So even if somebody's being greedy, and it's not that they're afraid that God won't provide, even if they're just being greedy and they sow in the 6th year, not believing that promise, even then they're both a lack of faith, because the person who's greedy is assuming God is a liar and that they're going to have more come in for planting that year than through obeying him. So either way, it's a lack of faith kind of disobedience. But there's so much more to this chapter. That's like just one of the, I think, 3 big things this chapter talks about is that land Sabbath. And we just started our first garden, so I'm like, okay. This chapter outlines how to keep the year of Jubilee as well. Its observance affects so much. It affects family, inheritance, and property. And in this chapter, it counts out how to mark the year of the Jubilee. God says every 7th year is the Sabbath for the land, like what we just talked about. And then he says in the 7 times 7th year from coming into the land, when that whole cycle starts. So 7 land Sabbaths. It's 49 years. So in that 49th year, on Yom Kippur, which is, the one where, we fast and, except for like pregnant women, on Yom Kippur where we fast, and it is right after the Feast of Yom Teruah, the Feast of Trumpets. A shofar blast was to be sounded throughout all the land on Feast of Trumpets. So if for those of you who are here for Feast of Trumpets, we all blew our shofars, and the kids had theirs too. It was super duper loud and overstimulating for some of us. But it was super fun as well to just kind of have our outside voice be our inside voice. So in addition to that, God says on the 49th year, and this is like around 10 days after we've all just been making all this racket with all this shofar, not racket, all this shout. It's an organized racket. So it's a shout with this feast of shouting, Yom Teruah. About 10 days after that, in the 49th year, in addition to all of that, on Yom Kippur, the one where we fast, the whole land was to erupt again with the sound of trumpets. So in the year before Jubilee, only about 2 weeks after trumpets, the sound of the shofar was to be heard again. And so imagine the entire land. The command wasn't for just Angie and Lorenzo to do it. It was for everybody. Everybody was going to be doing that throughout the land. And I mean, there's not a stipulation as to doing it all day or whatever, but it was a day of shouting. And then in addition, Yom Kippur, that year right before Jubilee. In the 50th year, so this is right at the end of the year when all of this noise, all this shouting, in the 50th year, after 49 years, came the long-awaited Jubilee. This would be a double land Sabbath, due to being the year after the 7th land Sabbath, in addition to the year of Jubilee also being commanded as a Sabbath for the land. So that's 2 years, which, if you remember, we just talked about God promising, if you were worried about it, he'll command his blessing over you, and he'll provide 3 years of harvest in that 6th year. So that's where this comes in handy, because that's the 6th year harvest. He's covering for that 49th year Sabbath, and then the Jubilee year. So that's where that promise comes in handy, is in the year of Jubilee. Most people likely never lived to celebrate more than one in an entire lifetime. Like all the other festivals, you get to celebrate every year and look forward to them. It's so fun, especially as a child. And those who saw 2 of these were likely a celebrated rarity, as these would have had to be at least around 100 years old if they happened to be born in the year of the Jubilee. If I may, imagine Bilbo Baggins' 111th birthday kind of special. You are to make the 50th year holy and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It is to be a jubilee to you when each of you is to return to his own property and each of you is to return to his family. Leviticus 25:10. This is a time of reunion. Moreover, the land is not to be sold permanently because the land is mine, for you are sojourners with me. For any land you possess, you are to provide for redemption for the land. If your brother becomes poor and sells some of his property, then his nearest kinsman may come and redeem what his brother has sold. 23:25. In addition, if the land was redeemed to its original owner or kinsman of the owner, the cost of redemption. So if somebody was to sell their land, it was a temporary sale. Before the Jubilee, you could redeem it for money. You could pay for it back. But then on the Jubilee, you'd get it back mandatorily. But if the land was redeemed to its original owner or kinsman of the owner, the cost of redemption was in proportion to how many years of gain the one in current possession of it had until they would mandatorily have to release it to the original owner in the year of Jubilee. So if it was like 1 year until Jubilee, you would pay a lot less money for it because the owner was going to have to release it to you anyway in the following year. But if it was like the 49th year and you were going to redeem it, you'd sold it, right after Jubilee, you'd have to pay a lot more money. And God says, after that, he says, if you sell anything to your neighbor or buy it from your neighbor, you are not to wrong one another. 25:14. And it's obviously important because he emphasizes it again in verse 17. You are not to cheat one another, but fear your God, for I am Yahweh your God. So, and of course, that's not just your brothers, because in Proverbs we read about God hating unjust scales and measures. But this is also a time of redemption. If anyone of the nation of Israel was so poor as to not be able to pay for debts or to, for whatever reason, they were very poor, they could sell themselves as a servant, but they were not permitted to be treated as a slave. Now, this is the people, God's chosen people. And there are some slightly different stipulations for a few of the nations. And I actually very much want to delve into that myself and explore why that is. Because God is just and fair, much more than I. So I kind of want to understand that better. But for the people of Israel, they would be treated as a servant, not a slave. And they, of course, on Jubilee, were released from that debt, from whatever they owed, and they went free. From my understanding of this chapter, this was a time of liberation for the people of Israel as well.